Hey, Doug and Mark, it's George Santos here. Oh my God, I know you guys have your little podcast about sentencing, and you covered my entire case. And, I hope you guys are patting yourselves in the shoulder and in the back and you're happy because, the world is full of pretentious Monday morning quarterbacks like you. Hacks who live off of people's demise. People who wouldn't really know their ass from their elbow, but yet have an opinion. I understand I may have fallen, but you guys will never rise.
Over 1 million Americans face sentencing every year, and it will be the most important day of their lives. But we don't fully understand the system, how broken it is, and what we can do to make it better. I'm Doug Passon. I'm a 25-year criminal defense lawyer and a sentencing expert. My goal is to bring more awareness, more fairness, and more humanity to the sentencing process. So, are you ready? Then let's get set for sentencing. Hey everybody! 1:03, Friday afternoon, 4:03 Eastern Time, and it's a special edition of Set for Sentencing. I am Doug Passon. I am here in Studio 3553. Love that I can say I'm live in Studio 3553. I am here with my dear friend and colleague and guidelines guru, statistician extraordinaire, Mark Allenbaugh. Happy Friday, man.
Hey, happy Friday.
We are
It's great.
here to talk about a sentencing post-mortem for George Santos, who was sentenced this morning in federal court in Southern District of New York. Now
I think it was the Eastern District.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, sir. That's why
Yeah.
I have Mark to clean up my mess. Eastern District of New York, and Mark and I did a podcast on George Santos almost 2 years ago to the month. It
Yeah.
was May. It was May of 2023, right after he was indicted. And in that podcast, we'll put that in the links in the show notes. But Mark made his guideline analyses, and we're going to see if how close you were. I don't think we did predictions about what would happen because he had just been charged,
Yeah.
presumption of innocence. He hadn't pled guilty. So we laid out the guidelines, and really what we talked about is what he was going to need to do with himself
Yes.
to avoid getting slammed at sentencing. And spoiler alert, he got slammed at sentencing today.
Yeah.
And so clearly George, he has his own podcast called Pants on Fire.
Mhm.
And clearly he was too busy with his own podcast to listen to ours. Otherwise, even though we weren't giving him legal advice, he might have learned something. Anyway, so before we dig into George Santos sentencing post-mortem, because it is Friday afternoon and it's damn near 5 o'clock where you are, I feel like tequila
Yep.
is appropriate. And this was, how I love to be thematic, right?
Yes.
Well, this was so easy today, because one of my go-to brands of tequila is called Santo.
I was
Santo.
gonna say, go Santos.
Santo. Now, I got a little fix here. Wait, ready? So this
Yeah.
is the beauty of a Dymo label maker. Ready? There. Okay. There. 1, 2, 3. Okay. So now it's, I don't know if you can see that. It's very reflective.
Yeah.
It
There you go.
says
Oh, right. Okay.
there. Now it says Santo. And
Yeah. I,
and I love to tell stories, right? This is a tequila by Sammy Hagar and Guy Fieri. And
okay.
Sammy, is one of the original celebrity tequila makers, and he made Cabo Wabo back in the day, and it was really good tequila. But he sold,
I
he
liked
sold
him
that.
better before Van Halen, before he went over there, but that's just me.
Yeah, yeah, I kind of with you. There's nothing like a
Yeah.
David Lee Roth,
Yeah.
but
You can't replace
the
David.
st
No.
the this he was the original celebrity tequila guy, and you know how I feel about most celebrity tequilas. They're not so good, but that one was a
Right.
good one. And the story goes, a big company came to buy him out, as many of those do,
Mhm.
and they said, "We want to buy Cabo Wabo for 10 million bucks." And he said, "I don't know, man. I'm Sammy Hagar. I don't think $10 million is gonna really change my
Right.
life in any meaningful way." And they said, "Well, what would?" And he said, "Maybe 100 million." And they said, "Done." So he sold Cabo Wabo, And then he probably had a non-compete for like 7 years. And as soon as that was over, he paired with Guy Fieri, and they're making Santo. And this is actually very good tequila, and I like it a lot. And that is what I'll be drinking today. Secondly, I need your hot take, current events, because we've done the last two podcasts. We have talked about
Mhm.
the slide, quick, deep slide into fascism in our country. We were talking about Mr. Garcia, Abrego Garcia, and
Right.
this immigration stuff. And I'm sure you've been following the news. The federal government, the FBI, Kash Patel, literally just arrested a judge in
A judge.
Milwaukee.
Yep. State
Did you
judge.
did you hear about that?
Yep.
Um,
Yeah. So
that's is
there's
that are
there's
you
a
as freaked
meme.
out by that as I am?
Well, it's interesting. There's a meme that's circulating on social media right now, and it's a supposedly a quote by Trump that says something to the effect that, judges need to learn their place. They're here to serve the state, not the other way around. And if they continue to not abide by essentially what I say, I'm going to keep enforcing. I'm going to keep arresting them as he did today. But the funny thing is, the point of the meme is the quote isn't by Trump, even though you would think it is. It was by Hitler.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so, this whole I know it used to be really bad form to compare Trump to Hitler. And it seemed to be rather you know, too extraordinary, too outlandish. But it's not anymore. I mean, we basically are in the early stages of a dictatorship. When he's especially now when he's going around directing and getting directly involved in having the Department of Justice arrest judges that he doesn't agree with
Right.
for whatever they're doing. So this really sets a bad precedent, and now it's pitting the federal government against the state
Yeah.
or against individual states.
Yeah.
So this is a big problem. This is another um, uh, I guess, a defining moment or a paradigm shift. I mean,
Yeah.
we had it before with him deporting um, foreign nationals without any due process, and then stating that he was going to do the same thing for U.S. citizens. And now he's going after judges, and he'd already been going after law firms, large law firms and universities.
Hmm.
So this is
Yeah.
the only saving grace that we have out of all of this is the fact that he is so damn incompetent, as well as and so therefore he surrounds himself with incompetent people or yes men, but they lack competency as well. So they can't any big bold scheme that he might have. At least we can rest a little easy
Yeah.
that he's not going to be able to institute this in any coordinated fashion. So,
I
yeah,
wish I shared that optimism because, yeah, there's a lot of bozos around him, but they're malevolent bozos and they have no shame and no guardrails. And I thought just ignoring a court order was a bridge too far. Now we're throwing the judge in prison. And, I don't know what this supposedly, person who was here without documentation, who he was, what his status was. A lot of these folks do have legal status to be here, so I'm not going to take the fucking government's word for it that this guy was even a quote unquote illegal. But whatever happened, the judge made a decision in her courtroom
right, right.
how she was going to handle the fact that these ICE agents were chomping at the bit to round this guy up, and not for nothing. But the government wants to paint these people as terrorists, these unrepentant gang member, remorseless terrorist threat to national security. I'm sorry, but remorseless terrorists don't show up for court in the fucking first place. Let it
Right.
not be lost on people that this gentleman had a court order to appear for whatever his court proceeding was, and he voluntarily appeared in a courthouse. which means if he's here under immigration supervision and immigration court says you need to appear to do this procedure, that procedure, you need to check in, I need to know where you are, what you're doing, clearly he's complying, or he would have
Yeah.
never been in that fucking courthouse in the first place. So don't sit here and tell me that these are the worst of the worst gang member terrorist criminals that we have to deport under the Enemies Act of 17 fucking 98. That is bullshit. Don't buy
Yeah.
into that for a second. And clearly this judge seems to me on its face, I don't know the facts, but it seems to me on its face, she agreed, and now she's in a federal detention cell.
Yeah.
And if you want to Cash Patel poke a bear, put a fucking judge in jail and see how things start going for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
See
Well,
how
yeah,
things start going for you.
right.
Anyway, I got a little hot and bothered, but this is, I think the biggest problem is people are like,
Well,
pretending like these are normal times and we can't
no,
do
they're not.
anything
They're
normal. It's
not.
not.
Yeah. No, we
And
should be
here,
we should be hot and bothered and angry and upset and protesting and marching in the streets, doing all of that stuff. This is absolutely the time for all of that. We've
and
crossed the
rallying to this
Rubicon.
judge's defense as lawyers,
Yeah.
whatever help she and any other judge who's going to be. I mean, I don't agree with judges all the time in their rulings, but the courts are the only thing that has any hope right now of keeping this in check.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's that. And I don't think your Hitler analogy is over the top at
No,
all.
that's my point. It's not over the top. It's very apropos for what's going on right now. Yeah.
And people are like, well, he's not rounding people up and putting them in camps. Well, actually, he
Yes,
is
he
now.
is. Yes, he
And,
is.
he's testing the waters to see how far he can go with that.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, we're
Yep.
here to talk about it's wrong, and it's on my mind, and I'm glad we talked about it. But let's do
Yep.
a quick. We don't want to. It's Friday afternoon. We've got at least 1 million people tuning into this live stream, so we don't want to keep them in suspense too long. So,
Right.
where do we start with our
Well,
friend that we don't know,
So
Mr.
George
Santos?
Santos. So let's so 2 years ago, he gets indicted, and we did a little podcast, kind of reviewing what we thought he was going to receive or what his guidelines look like. So I have up here on the screen. This is a screenshot from our podcast, then the video portion of it.
Yeah.
And I had predicted him to be at an offense level 26, but I forgot this was shortly after 4C 1.1, the 0 point offender adjustment had been enacted. So we're still getting used to the
Yeah.
all the exceptions to it and blah blah blah. So anyway, the bottom line is I had him at a 26 during the course of the podcast. I reduced him down to a 24 because, as you pointed out, the 0 point offender did not apply because he was going to get a
Right.
leadership role.
Right.
Lo and behold, so at the end of the day, the point is I
You
predicted
overestimated on the leadership role, but you thought he could
well,
get as much to four. We never
yeah,
know, but you
yeah.
said he could get
Well,
as
here,
much
I
as
mean, here's
four.
the bottom line is I estimated that his total offense level would be 24, and guess what? Now what you're going to see here, I don't know. Can you see the
Yep,
this
I
guy?
can
Okay,
see.
this is from the
What?
government sentencing memo. Look, 24, 24
Oh,
also same.
Mark
So
Allenbaugh was right
I
on the
am
money
fucking brilliant.
two
Yeah,
years
but
ago, and here we are.
here we are.
But
So yeah,
in fairness, so I'll nitpick
we
you.
arrived at it a little
We
differently.
arrived at it
Yes.
a tiny bit differently, but yeah,
Yeah.
you got it
Yeah.
exactly 100% right.
Right.
And
Right.
guess what? Can I that's
Go.
admirable. I'm proud of you, and I want to brag on myself too, because if I went back and listened to that podcast this morning to refresh, and I said, I was reluctant to use the words pathological liar, but given the whole long history of all the crazy lies he told, I said, for lack of a better term, he really does present as a pathological liar, and that's going to
Yeah.
be the government's narrative. And you
Right.
have a choice when you get the unfortunate circumstance of being indicted on a federal crime and working through the system. You have to flip the script. You have to take control of the story. And it was not hard at all to know what that story was going to be. And so the question is, how did he do? What grade are we going to give him on that? And I just wanted to
Uh,
quote one thing from the
mm,
government's memo, because I
yeah.
read the government's memo, and this is where I get to pat myself sadly on the back. Did you see
Mm,
what they said about George Santos? He said, um, Santos's history and characteristics, so we're under 3553, the
yeah.
history and character of George Santos. Santos is a pathological liar and fraudster. For years, Santos manufactured and promoted a fictionalized biography, one that depicted himself as a highly educated, independently wealthy, successful businessman, all premised on a heap of lies. Now, I ran a search for the word lie in the government's sentencing submission,
Mm.
and the word lie, lies, or lied came up a total of 41 times. So, like, I
Uh,
guess maybe you didn't
so
didn't take a rocket scientist to predict that
no,
this is what's coming, but the question is, what do you do about it?
yeah.
So,
Well,
what
what
more
we
on the
said,
guidelines do you want to
yeah.
talk about? Because we'll get to
Well,
that
just
too.
so we could just continue on that. So the one of the things that I don't think was the case when he was initially indicted, I don't recall him being indicted for initially for aggravated identity theft, which carries a 2-year consecutive sentence, consecutive to whatever
Yeah.
the guidelines were. And so what I have up on the screen now is a portion of the transcript from when he pled guilty. And this is the court reading this to him, explaining what his the plea agreement calculated his guidelines to be. And it was, as you can see here, is 24, which is a 51 to 63 months. But then, as the court notes, there was one count 6, that was for aggravated identity theft, which is really the only, even though it's a consecutive sentence, we colloquially refer to it as a mandatory minimum, 24-month mandatory minimum. This is the only mandatory minimum generally that white collar offenders or economic offenders are subject to. So,
Hmm.
as the court notes here, his real guideline range was 75 to 87 months. And at the bottom of this page here, the court also notes to him that any sentence under 95 months or less, he waives his right to appeal. So he could only appeal a sentence if the court imposed it greater than 95 months.
Okay.
So his range, his effective range, the guidelines plus the 24 was 75 to 87 months. And before we reveal, for those who don't know, who haven't been living under a rock, don't know what a sentence is, I don't want to talk about it just yet. So the
I thought we already
next,
did a spoiler alert on
did
it,
we?
but
Oh,
I don't
well,
know.
okay. It was 87 months.
Okay.
So what we have here, this is a little, this is a screenshot of Jason. And you and I have spoken about Jason ad nauseum over the last few years.
Judicial sentencing information. This is the
Yeah.
statistical database that the feds maintain.
That the Sentencing Commission as well
Yeah.
as the FJC put out, but
Yeah.
it's very crude.
Yeah.
So here the way I entered this, or with the inputs, were offense level 24, criminal history category 1, so you get the 51 to 63 months. But then I also said he was convicted of at least one count of aggravated identity theft. So there were 31 individuals, according to Jason, over the last 5 fiscal years that matched that criteria. And the average was only about 60 months. And this is where you and I, before we had done this podcast earlier today, when we were talking about this, is both you and I agreed that we thought he'd get around 60 months.
Yeah.
But we thought he would give a good allocution, and apparently he did not. And that really isn't all that surprising given his conduct over
I'm
the.
sorry, do we know if he gave, I mean, I know he wrote a letter to the court before sentencing that is, I guess, could charitably be called an allocution,
Yeah, it
but
was a shitty
we'll
allocution.
talk about that. But
Yeah,
do you know if
yeah.
he gave any
I
statement at all in court today?
I don't know. I
Okay.
don't know. But regardless, whatever he said, if he said anything, didn't help.
Yeah.
And I think that the real theme of this we'll talk about in a second, because I just want to go through some stats, is that allocution can be very important, and this is a really good example of what not to do. If a client's going to be like George Santos, uh, don't let him open his mouth.
Yeah.
Certainly don't let him. And look at letters before you submit them. I'm surprised that his counsel allowed
I
him to
was
submit the
thinking the
letter.
same
Yeah,
thing. I was
I was
thinking,
just like,
listen,
nah, we're not submitting that. No, 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 no,
yeah,
no.
but
But
listen, I have to imagine that counsel had a very difficult time with client management. I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt, not knowing them
yeah, no, you're
or the
right. You're
client,
right.
but
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I would
I
have
would have
withdrawn then. I
very
mean, seriously, I would have said,
strongly,
look, if you're going to submit this letter, I'm withdrawing.
yeah.
That's how serious, this is. The client can drive to some extent, but if you're representing a client, you do not let them submit a letter like
Well,
this.
and while we're talking about it, because I have the letter that he wrote up dated April 19th, and I think part of it was in response to a letter, a follow-up memo that the court submitted, sorry, that the prosecutor submitted to the
Yeah.
court because they wanted the court to know that he was posting really troubling things on social media and
And
basically
he
not,
was.
he
Yeah.
was, he was not taking any responsibility. He was making more false statements, blah, blah, blah.
Well,
And
here's what he was posting.
oh, good. You have this slide. Okay.
Yeah, so here's a slide what we're looking at for those who are listening. I don't know if this is like going out through the radio or something like that.
No, it's
But
just on YouTube. And right now we have one, two people watching. And I think one of them is me because I have it on the phone. So I'm sure they'll be watching the replay
yeah.
though.
I'm sure that's 1 or 1 million.
Nobody
But
has anything better to do on at 4:30 Eastern time
right,
on a Friday, I guess.
right.
Okay, go ahead.
So these are tweets that he was sending out over the last couple of weeks that the government took screenshots of, and they filed it in this motion, or I don't know if it was really a motion, but just kind of like a supplemental sentencing memorandum
Yeah.
to let the court be aware of, this guy isn't accepting responsibility. I mean, he's taunting the government. He's still basically claiming that he's innocent, or he's
Yeah.
victimizing himself. He's trying to paint himself as the
Yeah.
victim here. So this is anything but accepting responsibility. And, if you want to get hammered, and if you want to piss off a judge, then do this.
Yeah.
Go ahead and do this. I mean, you might, but see, here's the point. If you're going to do this, then go to trial and make
Yeah.
make all these arguments at trial.
Yeah.
You don't plead guilty, and then, I mean, this is the dumbest thing that you could possibly do, is plead guilty, but then make all these statements.
Right.
If you're going to plead guilty, then suck it up and go with it. Otherwise, you're going to end up getting the longest sentence ever for somebody matching these criteria. So what we're seeing here, I actually found 36 cases. Jason said there was only, what did Jason say? 31, but I actually found 36 that matched the criteria: sentenced under 2B 1.1, criminal history 1, no 5K, mandatory minimum of 24 months. There was 36 over the last 5 fiscal years. Nobody got over 84 months. Nobody.
Nobody. George
Nobody.
Santos did.
He did today, so he's a record breaker. So he got the highest sentence. I shouldn't say ever, at least over the last 5 fiscal years, but I kind of doubt that anybody's gotten this
Well,
high for such a low, an otherwise low
yeah.
total offense level.
Yeah.
So he ended up getting at the top of the guideline range. As you will recall, the way the court at his plea colloquy calculated his range to be, it was 75 to 87 months. So the court went and gave him the
I
highest within range sentence it thought was appropriate, which was
And I don't want
87
it to
months.
be lost on the viewers and listeners how rare it is.
It
The majority of cases are not even guideline sentences, they're below.
Well,
And
Doug, look at what I have here on our screen.
uh-huh,
This little bar chart at the bottom, what it
yeah.
indicates, and this is from the commission's own data. Only 18% of those similarly situated to Santos received a sentence within the range. And I
And
guarantee you, I
that it
guarantee
wasn't
you,
at the top end.
it was not at the top end.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Obviously, that's what this says. It wasn't even at the
Right.
top end. So,
Because here's the
he's,
thing, if you are
yeah,
even minimally competent and present some mitigation in the right way at sentencing, the worst case scenario should be a guideline range sentence at the low end.
at the
You
low
know,
end. Yeah.
you have to really, really have some serious problem or be a total outlier to even get a guideline range, let alone a high end. So,
Yeah.
but this is the bed that he made,
Yeah.
and I'm it seems very clear from our outside perspective of why the judge did. I wish we had a live stream from the courtroom. I wish we had the sentencing transcript, but it's not rocket science.
No.
Listen, I'm looking at the letter that he submitted to the court, and he literally called the prosecution liars.
Yeah.
So you don't get to be a pathological liar and say, I'm not the liar, they're the liars, and
Right.
think that things are going to come out for you. Now, in his defense, he has said, I'm sorry. He said it's this, there's been months of bruising self-examination where he's claims to have come to this epiphany that, he was wrong and that he's responsible. He even did this and he underlined it in his letter. I did this, me. I am responsible. Okay. Well, that's nice. But, an allocution's nice. And saying I'm sorry is nice. But if you don't back it up with any kind of action to show that this culmination of months of bruising self-examination has caused you to make changes in your life and start to right the wrongs of, why you're there, it's meaningless. And so
Well,
what has he done
yeah.
to show the court that not only does he realize he did wrong, but that he's taking every step that he can to make it right?
Well, yeah, right. So, I mean, what I think really what this is a great example of is the if you plead guilty, your allocution should never be about litigating the case.
Yeah. Let the lawyers
Ne-
do that.
I'm
If
sorry?
there's let the
Well,
lawyers do
yeah,
that. If there's
but it
something
doesn't.
legitimate that the government is doing that's not right, that's the lawyer's
Yes,
job to
exactly.
say,
Let the lawyers do that. Let the lawyers do that. Your allocution should, as if you pled guilty, should never be about litigating the case. Put your ego, unless you want to go to prison for a long time. I don't know. Maybe there's people like that out there, and apparently Santos might be one of them. But assuming that your goal is as short a term as possible, then if you plead guilty, your allocution should have nothing to do with the case, but rather that you've accepted responsibility, you understand the gravity of the situation, you understand the gravity of your offense conduct, and how you're going to better yourself in the future. What are you going to do when you're in prison? What's your plan once you're out? All that stuff. What
yeah,
community support? And one thing I noticed here too that was interesting and very telling that I thought was stupid for Santos to highlight in his letter was the fact that he had no support, zero whatsoever. Not only did nobody show up in support of him, but he had no letters in support. Now, there might that I'm not going to fault him for not having that. I mean, the guy is a pathological liar and probably burnt all possible bridges with anybody in his life. So he didn't have anybody, but you don't highlight that. You don't come to court and say, look, by the way, judge, not only am I here to be sentenced by you, but I have nobody on this earth that is going to vouch for me to say anything nice about me.
mm,
Period.
mm,
Nobody. You
yeah,
don't you don't accentuate that.
right.
I think that just gives fuel to the fire for the court that you really are a bad guy and you don't get it because you're sitting here painting this big negative as if it's kind of a positive for you. It's not.
It's not. It's
Yeah.
not. Well, can we talk about the sentencing memos for a
Oh God,
minute?
yes.
Okay. I first of all, I don't know the lawyers that were on this case. Like I said, I imagine they had a lot of challenges, so I
Yes.
defer to them. I looked them up, and one of the best qualifications that I didn't see that they were former prosecutors, so that was nice. And because not that I have a huge problem with that, but there are some problems with that. We've talked about another podcast,
Yeah,
but some of them are great. I've had some on my podcast, but it's a club, it's a select club. But anyway,
yeah.
and one of them's a musician. Like, so I was like, okay, this guy's pretty cool, and because I play music. But beyond that,
I know.
what grade would you give the defense sentencing memo?
Well,
Are you willing to say?
I would give the sentencing memo like a B minus.
That's
The
exactly what I was gonna say.
Yeah, well, that's why we work together, buddy. That's it. So, yeah, I give it a B minus. And there's a lot of the boilerplate stuff that needs to be there, and it was there. But the disappointing factor here is they went old school with data. The big issue, the whole point of the sentencing guidelines and the whole philosophy behind federal sentencing for the past 40 years
Yeah,
has been similarly situated individuals need to be sentenced
yeah,
similarly.
yeah,
And yes, everybody is an individual, and yes, there has to be individualized sentencing, but not everybody is a unicorn. And even though that there are unusual factors here with respect to Santos, all those were aggravators. And you as defense counsel, you kind of steer clear of those aggravators, but rather what you do is you take the guidelines and you look for similarly situated individuals that have the same guidelines. You go to a place like Jason and you use stats to show how many individuals out there received 2 years, which was the minimum they could argue for in this
yeah,
case, and is in fact what they did argue for was for 2 years.
yeah,
But they had nothing to back that up. Rather, what they did the old school thing that before Jason and before people really started looking at the sentencing data would do is you just go out and you cherry pick.
yeah,
And you cherry pick a bunch of cases, but the cases that they cherry picked, they had to do with other politicians that ended up getting sentenced federally.
yeah,
But those cases, by and large, they were just because they're a politician doesn't mean that was a good sentence to or a good case to compare to. They were comparing apples not to oranges, but apples to cars. I mean, they were
no.
completely different cases, have different
I had
offense
I
levels,
had a
different
friend who
facts.
used to say you're comparing apples to hand grenades, and I
Well,
always
sure.
like that.
There, I mean
I
that
always like
and
that.
actually that is what happened here because they blew up. I think
Yeah,
the examples that they used were not helpful at all, and if anything, were harmful because it showed just how egregious Santos's conduct was. Because by and large, pretty much everybody that they compared Santos to, those individuals all had lower offense levels,
yeah,
where
yeah,
Santos had a much higher offense level.
yeah.
Plus, he had the aggravated identity theft. And I don't think any of these other individuals were subject to an aggravated identity theft charge.
Which
But if they would have
in
come to
fairness,
somebody like me, I could have
yes,
shown them here are
yes,
these are the comparators that you want, and
right.
this is how you argue for a 24-month sentence.
Yes, I think
And the
he
other
called
thing,
it a hunt and peck. What he
yeah,
called us all.
exactly, it was the
With
hunt
this.
and peck. And the other thing that they didn't discuss is how overcrowded the prisons are. Santos maybe I wouldn't say maybe he is a
You,
pathological liar. Sorry.
yeah, go keep going with that, but yeah,
But there's statistics on that, and they could have argued about how overcrowded and how crazy the BOP is right now, and it's all falling apart, primarily because of Trump. And there was none of that in the sentencing memo, at least
okay.
that I
Well,
recall seeing.
and let me just drill down even deeper in that because we always stress to tell the story of what prison will be like and how exponentially more punitive it can be for someone with special needs and challenges.
Or high
So,
profile.
or well, that is definitely a challenge, high
Yeah.
profile. But so the defense team did, to their credit, raise some issues that he has, but they didn't tie it into what that means for life in the BOP that is
Right.
dangerous, dysfunctional, dehumanizing, understaffed, no medical care, no psychological care. Listen, they said, what did they say? He suffers from chronic back pain following a 2016 car accident. Well, guess what? We have top bunks and bottom bunks in the BOP,
Right.
and you don't get to choose. and most people get stuck on a top bunk. What does that look like for someone with chronic back pain or who is overweight or whatever to have to be assigned to a top bunk? He has respiratory issues. Well, guess what? The BOP is notorious for crumbling infrastructure. So what do
Right.
we have in BOP that we hear about constantly? Black mold.
Yeah.
That's going to be great for someone with respiratory issues. He has, they said, significant mental health challenges, including a history of depression coupled with suicidal thoughts. Well, we've all had those clients, and we
Mhm.
know that there's no meaningful psychological help for them at all.
Yeah.
At most, they want to stick them in some kind of group counseling that happens once a week or 2 weeks and expect them to bear their innermost thoughts to a bunch of strangers who are also inmates in a BOP institution and think that that's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And so, nobody ever said, listen, this is what, I know he's going to prison for some period of time, but every minute of every hour of every day is going to be hellish for them. Therefore,
Mhm.
that's punishment, and it doesn't
Yeah.
need to be this extreme of 87
Right.
months.
Right.
So
Yeah.
they needed to do that. They don't do that, and I'm not trying to be hypercritical. A lot of lawyers don't know what they don't know about
Right.
the various narrative threads, but that's one that I think, when you have a client with special needs like this, you absolutely positively have to tell. But my biggest issue was they put all this, their intentions were right. They put all this stuff in there, but it's what I call and material only. In other words, it's and he was raised in a household with various challenges, and his father drank, and his education was disrupted, and he was bullied, and he supports his sister who has a daughter with autism, but without weaving that all together in a narrative arc, to make that a story and to make it relevant to the outcome and the determination of sentencing, it's
Mhm.
lost. You basically let the reader take all that and make their
Yeah.
own story in their head. And you have to measure it against the competing story. This is an adversarial system. And we already said, what is a competing story? Unrepentant fraudster. And the
Yep.
government very effectively made the narrative arc, the therefore. He's
Yeah.
going to reoffend is the therefore.
Yes. And they hammered that. They hammer and that, this is another reason why I would have, put a gag on Santos because he just reinforced the fact that he's going to be a recidivist.
Right. And
And
and if he's a pathological, I mean, if there's something actually pathological here, that conveys a story of he doesn't have control and he's
right,
bound to make these mistakes again. So if you look at the narrative arc and the thread, there's none here in the defense, but in the government's, it's yes, he pled guilty and he did say he was sorry, but hasn't done anything to right his wrongs, and even worse, he's still
right,
perpetuating these lies. Therefore,
exactly,
we know he's going to be a danger in the future, and you must give him as much time as possible. And
right,
that's exactly what the judge did. So, if
exactly.
you want to
Yeah,
award a trophy for narrative arc and story development, the and but therefore, the prosecution wins hands down. And
yeah,
this is what happens when we just throw a bunch of shit out there and hope that something sticks. It doesn't work
right,
that way. It
right.
doesn't work that way. So, I would have probably had him evaluated to psychologically to help explain why he's done what he's done. Maybe they did, and it was just really not
Yeah,
helpful. And
probably came
they
back.
did.
He's a pathological liar, so you're not going to want to use
But I would have
that.
had him not just say sorry, but actually do something about it. And I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't see anything on this record that he, I don't know, did some community service on his own without being asked, or
Well,
help pay back restitution. He's got
that
a
hark.
GoFundMe.
Yeah, I'm
Go
sorry
ahead.
to interrupt, but that
Yeah.
harkens back to our first podcast on this, where I raised the issue of alternatives to incarceration.
Hmm.
And not only did Santos not watch our podcast, but I don't think counsel did either,
Yeah.
because I don't see anything in the memo that raised that issue.
Right.
There are alternatives, other sanctions
Yeah.
that the court could have been creative with and really, made Santos do something. I mean, he's doing these, not TikTok, I can't remember what it is, but the celebrity stuff,
Cameo.
cameo. Maybe he starts doing cameos about, you know, keeping your, not
Don't.
lying to people to get money or something like that. I don't know. But the point is
Well,
that
he
there are
has a
many.
podcast. He has a platform.
Well, he has a
He-
exactly.
and
He
guess what
still
his
has a
podcast is
platform,
called? Pants on Fire.
right? Ironically, so I mean,
No,
this
it's
would.
not even ironic. It's just a perpetuation of the story that I'm a unrepentant pathological liar. I
Well, I
know it
mean,
was
that's
tongue
the
in cheek.
irony.
I know
That's
he's
the
being tongue in cheek, but the point is, no lawyer could have credibly asked for alternatives to incarceration because there's no hope from the judge's perspective that he'd be worthy of that or would follow through with it or had I
well.
would have had
You got to
already
ask. But
well, I would
mean,
have, but I would have already had him walk in that path. It's been
yeah,
2 years, Mark, since we did
yeah,
this podcast.
yes, I know. 2 years.
He had 2 years to walk
Yep.
the walk.
Yeah.
He could have walked in with a check that says, I've been struggling financially, but I
Yeah.
did a GoFundMe and I've done all these cameos and I've got a podcast. And I know he's making money on the podcast because I listened to an episode today and he's got a sponsor like like I don't have a fucking sponsor. I don't make money from this podcast. So he has income revenue or probably
But
other
that,
sources.
by the way, it's interesting you raised that. That was the whole point of why the court continued sentencing, to give him time to uh, earn some money on Cameo to start making restitution. So that's a good point. I don't know if he paid any restitution today. Or
From what I saw in his letter, he says I'm planning to pay restitution, but
yeah, see,
I
he
think
should have been paying restitution all along with that Cameo stuff.
I think it's fair to assume that if he would have put aside money, any money,
Yeah.
that would
Yes.
have been showcased in the defense pleadings and
Yes.
this
Yes.
thing. So, and
Yeah.
it wasn't even that much money, grand scheme
Mm.
of federal fraud cases. It was in the hundreds of thousands. We usually see it in the millions.
Yeah.
So even and if George and guess what? If George Santos would have gotten a job at Burger King and donated $10 from his paycheck every week, the judge would have said, "Wow, this guy gets it. He's humbled.
Yeah.
He's real.
Yeah.
He's sincere." I didn't see any of that. I just saw a bunch of complaining and woe is
Yeah.
me and the government's lying and everything
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
So it is no surprise. No surprise. That's what happens. That's what
Yeah.
happens. Well, what did we miss?
Well, I got to get going. So
Yeah,
I
okay.
don't know if we missed anything, but
What do you have going on a Friday afafternoon?
yeah, well,
some kid stuff.
some kid stuff. Yeah.
All right. Well, good. Well, I think we've done our duty. We were only going to go a half hour, but we're never able to stick
Yeah, I
within
know.
those parameters. So, 45 minutes, and we've done our job here. And I'm sorry that George Santos got slammed. I never like to see it, but we know why.
Yeah.
So, happy Friday, brother.
Okay, man.
Good to
Thank
see
you. Yeah, good to
Talk
see you
soon.
too.
That's it for today, but before we go, I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you to you, the listener, for spending time with us today getting set for sentencing. Whether you're a lawyer, someone who could use the help, or maybe you're just a true crime buff who loves the inside scoop on how this whole thing works. If you're interested in knowing more about what I do, mitigation videos, case consults, live teaching, on-demand educational content, books, articles, all of it, please visit www.dougpassonlaw.com. I'm Doug Passon. Until next time, hang in there. Wait a minute, that's a stupid way to sign off on a podcast about sentencing. Hang in there. What's the matter with you, man? I guess they call that gallows humor. Sorry. All right. Well, I will see you next time on Set for Sentencing. Bye-bye.